Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Let me paint a picture for you. You've just spent 25 minutes presenting a fairly large treatment plan to one of your patients. Let's say it's 6 crowns and 4 root canals. You've explained everything. They've asked you a few questions. They seem pretty engaged. They nodded their head at all the right times. And then you get towards the end, and the patient tells you that they don't want to do it right now because they're going on a cruise. Or they need to buy some new big screen TVs. Or they want to think about it. Or any other number of excuses that you hear on a day-to-day basis. So maybe you sit back. Maybe you're a little flummoxed. Maybe you're a little frustrated. You don't show the patient, of course. And you wonder, what's going on with this person? Do they have a low dental IQ? Do they not care about their teeth? Well, here's the truth. The low dental IQ, or rather, that's a bit of a myth, but the idea that a person doesn't care about their teeth, sure, there are people who are in that situation, but that is the exception rather than the rule. In most cases, when you see something like this happen, what actually occurred is the patient just didn't get it. Because if they got it, they would have done something about it. So this comes back to the subject of treatment acceptance. And in this week's episode, our inaugural episode actually, of Dental Business RX, we're going to be tackling this subject of treatment acceptance and teaching you 4 ways to improve it. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at MGE. I've run the company since 1998, and I've also been on site in over 1,000 different small businesses, primarily dental practices. So I have a pretty good idea of how what we teach clients rolls out in the real world. And we're going to be addressing this subject, tackling it head on. And we picked this as the first one only because a lot of people know us for our sales and treatment acceptance training. I know the word sales tends to get a bit of a bad rap. But if you really look at what you're attempting to do with a patient is getting them to want what it is that they need, which is really sales, for lack of a better way of saying it. So with that in mind, let's look at treatment acceptance as a whole is really the closest thing to a win-win for both you and your patients. If you think about it, you win and they win. It's good for you. It's good for your practice. It's good for career fulfillment. It improves your collections, as well as patients actually get what they need. So if you look at how would you improve treatment acceptance, obviously the answer is sales training. You have to be a better communicator. You have to know how to sell. But there's also an organizational side to sales, which is a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. Because, you're not going to sit and listen to a 20, 30-minute podcast and come out the other end as a top salesperson. But I will tell you this. There are a few things you could be changing right now that would actually improve your treatment acceptance. Today, if you're listening to this in the morning, you could start doing this today when you get into your practice. So with that in mind, let's just plunge right in. So let's start with point 1. When presenting treatment, you want to make sure that you have enough time. I can't stress this one enough. This is that organizational side I was just referring to. You could take the best salesperson, the best closer, if you will, and if you give them 5 minutes when it would really take an hour to explain something, they're not going to close it. You have to have adequate time. Conversely, I could take someone who's a mediocre closer, and if I give them a full hour, maybe they'll close 20 to 30% of the people that they talk to. Whereas if I give the great salesperson 5 minutes, they close no one. So time is of utmost importance. We actually have a little adage we give our clients here at MGE, which is don't start a presentation that you don't have time to finish. I can't get into the whys behind this. We teach this in our seminars, but specifically, put it this way, you'll notice that when you get a second opinion, they're easier to quote unquote sell than someone you're starting with from scratch. That's the reason. You started the sales process and you haven't had a chance to finish it. And I'll give you a little insight into this as we go, but let's paint how this normally works. So let's say this is a new patient. And maybe your new patients see the hygienist. We don't really have a position on that. They could see your hygienist or they see you. Ultimately, the doctor is going to have to do an exam anyway. So you walk into, let's say they're seeing your hygienist, and you've got 20 minutes on your schedule to see this new patient. So you spend 15 minutes, let's say, doing the exam and the charting and whatnot and reviewing the x-rays, and you see this patient needs a substantial amount of treatment. Well, you only have 5 minutes left. In a lot of cases, the doctor will start presenting the treatment then and there. Let's look at the conventional way this works. So the doctor will say, well, you need X, Y, and Z treatment and send them off with a treatment coordinator or a financial coordinator to discuss it further. Then the doctor rolls up to the front desk later in the day and asks what happened with, patient Joe, whoever it was that they presented the treatment to, and they're told, oh, Joe wanted to think about it. Well, what went wrong is you didn't have time to actually present it fully. So in that case, you'd be better off either ensuring that you have the time and they have the time, or not presenting it at all and bringing them back to do it. Not having enough time is a major reason for not getting enough acceptance. And I would say, so as far as if you wanted to adopt something today, here's what I would do. And you would apply this with patients of record as well, because there are tons and tons of patients who are coming in on your hygiene schedule that need treatment. And, you do your normal 5-minute recall exam. You don't have time to really get into it with them, answer questions, explain consequences, things along those lines. Is you need to block out some time in your schedule for lack of a better term, consults. Now, when we hear the word consults, we often think of, full mouth restorations or all on 4s or all on 6 cases or 10 implants or things along those lines. I view a consult as basically a sales opportunity, a time where you're going to actually be doing a treatment presentation. Because in some cases, let's say it's just 2 implants, or let's say it's 1 implant. That could be expensive for some people. That could be the cause of a discussion, or 2 crowns. That's $2,500, depending on where you practice, could be $2,800. That would require a discussion. That might take 20, 30 minutes to actually explain to somebody why it's important to do it. So you want to make sure you have time to do this. So let's say you've walked in the room, you got 5 minutes with that new patient or 5 minutes with that recall patient, and you don't have time. You've got a patient in another chair you got to get back to, and they don't have time. They have to go, one or the other. Maybe you have time and they don't, or they have time and you don't. You want to bring them back for a consult. And it's real simple. You tell them you want to bring them back, and you're going to have them come in. You don't start getting into what the treatment is. Tell them you want to bring them back and explain to them exactly what it was that you found in your examination. So how might this roll? Let's say it's a new patient. You walk in, you've done your exam, you have 5 minutes left in the appointment. You have a patient who's been seated in your chair. You have to leave the room. So today you don't have time. Maybe they do or don't, but you don't, obviously. So you're not going to present this treatment today. So you found a substantial amount of treatment for them to do. So what would you tell them? Well, you tell them you want to bring them back for a consultation. Now, when should you do these consultations? My recommendation, do them first thing in the morning and first thing after lunch. Now, why? If you do them first thing in the morning, it can be beneficial in a number of different ways. In a lot of practices, primary time is usually first thing in the morning, meaning you're doing primary procedures. That's when you're placing implants, prepping crowns, etc., and you're doing deliveries in the afternoon. Some practices do this, some practices don't. Let's say you do. Well, there's always the chance that somebody in your primary schedule could cancel. They could have a family emergency, something happens. Well, if you have 1 or 2 consults in the morning, first thing in the morning, because then you're distraction free, you can actually focus on this patient, there's always the chance that when you do this treatment presentation, this person could stay and take that slot from the patient who just canceled. And if you don't have a cancellation, you can always put them on the schedule, the next day, etc. So you do them first thing in the morning, and then first thing after lunch is good because then you're coming back from lunch, or maybe you worked a little bit through lunch, but there's a little bit of a break. You're not into something else while you're trying to present treatment, because when you present treatment, you want to be distraction free. You want to make sure that that patient has all of your attention. So now, as far as how to get the person back for the consult so that you have this adequate time, well, here's what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't say, hi, Jeff. We found that you need 6 crowns and 4 root canals, and I'd like you to come back for a consultation so I can explain it to you. You've actually started the sales process by telling me what you found. You're better off saying something along the lines of, look, we've gathered a lot of information today. I found a lot of things going on. I want to make sure I have time to explain this to you and review your treatment the right way. In other words, you want to make sure that the patient understands this is a big deal for you and a big deal for them. You want to review their case, make sure that you have the exact treatment plan that you want, and you have time to answer all of their questions. Now, one thing you'll find, and your staff can attest to this, is the doctor is going to tend to hold more weight with patients than anyone else in the practice. And the fact that you're willing to dedicate 20 minutes, 30 minutes to them to explain their treatment plan is usually a very big deal. How long you schedule for the consult really depends on the patient and the case. If it's a large case and the patient seems a bit rough, you might have to give yourself a half hour. If it's a smaller case and the person seems pretty upbeat, you can give yourself less time. But ultimately, you need to make sure that you have enough time. That's point one. Point number 2 has to do with understanding. You have to make sure the patient not only understands their treatment, but understands why they need their treatment. And to give you an idea of how bad this can get, I want to read something to you. It's from an article from the New York Times in 2007. I know it's a bit old, but I think it's still applicable today. It's from their health writer, Jane Brody. And the name of the article was The Importance of Knowing What the Doctor is Talking About. I want to read you this line. It's from 2007. What's the exact date here? It says January 30th, 2007. I'm sure you can find it online. It says this. How often have you left a doctor's office wondering just what you were told about your health or what exactly you were supposed to be doing to relieve or prevent a problem? If you are a typical patient, you remember less than half of what your doctor tries to explain. Now, I remember when I first read that, I thought, oh, well, patients, half the patients don't understand what doctors are telling them. Let me read that line again. It says, if you are a typical patient, you remember less than half of what your doctor tries to explain. So this means the average patient coming into your practice remembers less than half of what you tell them. We did a study a few years back looking at negative reviews for dental practices. We found that 30% of the negative reviews for dental practices came back to the treatment, presentation, planning, and acceptance process, the whole treatment presentation process. You know, it's one of these, I went to this practice thinking I just needed my teeth cleaned, and they told me I needed $4,000 worth of work, blah, blah, blah. I love how they always end with, so I went back to my old dentist, which, you know, that's kind of funny, but whatever. Anyway, but 30% of these have to do with the treatment presentation process. So the patient's walking out, not really understanding what that doctor told them, because you'll sometimes see the responses from these offices, which completely violate HIPAA, by the way, which is a whole other thing. And you can see what the practice was earnestly trying to help this patient, but the patient just didn't get it. They just didn't get it. So there's a couple things you want to do when you're explaining that treatment is you want to make sure that they understand it. And when we use the word understand, let's define this word specifically. Understanding means to grasp the meaning and significance of something. Grasp the meaning and significance of something. So you know what something means and you understand its significance. How important is it? And you'll find in a lot of cases, like that example I started the show off with, the person just doesn't understand why having the need for 4 root canals is that big of a deal. Like, yeah, I'm going to go on a Mediterranean cruise. What's the big deal? If they really understood what was going on, in other words, let's say this was a dentist sitting in front of you. You're telling you, hey, you need 4 root canals and 6 crowns. They would understand the importance of it. Well, I'm not saying they have to have a dental education to do this, but you have to make sure that it really hits home. There's a number of ways you can do this, but ultimately, I'll tell you what you don't want to do is don't just throw out a bunch of big words because that's the quickest way to lose somebody. Some people think that using big words makes you seem more, I know this isn't a word, doctorly, but actually all it does is it makes you lose people. This is something that I've battled for a long time. You know, I've lectured to almost 100,000 people in my career. And one thing I've often noticed is you'll see somebody and they want to ask a question, but they just don't. But you could see that instantaneous moment of non-comprehension. You know what I'm talking about. You tell a patient that they have an issue with the mesial surface of their tooth and you see the eyes glaze over for a second. And you wonder why they're not asking you a question. I honestly don't know. I could assume that people don't want to look stupid. I could assume any number of reasons, but sometimes people just don't ask questions. So if you go and tell them about the buccal surface of their tooth or distal surface or this or that procedure or whatever, when you don't have to, and they don't ask a question, the only thing I can assume is the patient thinks they're supposed to know and they don't want to look dumb. I mean, this is just my assumption. So I wouldn't use a lot of big words. I'd make it accessible. But the most important thing is not that the patient just understands what you want to do, but why and why it's important. So that's point 2. Point 3, and this one's, I don't want to use the word controversial because it's not really controversial, but it's actually extremely effective. The doctor has to discuss the fee. I'll say that one again for those of you who don't want to do this. The doctor, the dentist, has to discuss the fee. So what would that look like? That would look like this. If I've got, I'm using this 6 crowns for root canals example because it's easy and we've talked about it a couple of times now. So you're the doctor and you're in front of this patient. You've got the whole treatment plan breakdown and it has the estimated insurance participation. Let's say it's $1,000 like it has been since 1992. And you tell this patient, all right, so your treatment plan is $11,000 and we're expecting your insurance to pay about $1,000. So your portion would be $10,000. That to me is the minimum I would expect the doctor to do. Now, you may be listening to this and think, okay, sounds good. Or you may be listening to this and go, that's horrible. I could never do that. My patients would just think I'm all about the money. There could be I don't talk about money. That's beneath me, etc. Here's the truth. You own the business. That is your business. You know your fees. And a patient, again, remember this, a patient, ask your staff if you don't believe me. A patient is most apt to accept something from the doctor, a statement, an idea, a concept, than from anybody else in the practice. When they hear that from you, it holds more weight. And this can get beyond stupid. We had a client from South Florida, orthodontist. He did the MGE program and he did the basic sales training. That was one of the issues, tell the patients, in this case, in a lot of cases, it was parents, the fee. And he'd gone from, like $85,000 a month to $170,000 a month. And it wasn't just from sales training. He had some organizational stuff he was doing in the practice. And I see him one month. He comes up. His name was James. And I ask him how it's going. He says, well, we had a bit of a down month last month. Like, what happened? We did 140. Oh, okay. Did you change anything? He says, let me think. He goes, I stopped telling patients, or parents in this case, the fee. Like, really? I said, well, why? Well, one person had given him a hard time. Why are you telling me the cost? You're the doctor. One person. So mind you, he's talking to tons of parents. He's doing tons of treatment presentations, right? But one person gave him a hard time, so he changed. Statistic instantly went down. So I said, well, why don't you just start doing it again? He said, yeah, good idea. So he goes back next month, 170 again, no problem. It's that silly, folks. I'm not kidding you. Just telling the patient the fee. Now, you can take it a bit further as the doc, because look at it. Ultimately, your job as the doctor is to get this patient well. So if financial barriers and concerns or issues are going to block them from getting well, you should do whatever you can to help them overcome them. So we have clients who will go beyond that. They won't just tell them the fee. They'll say, yeah, it's your treatment plan's $11,000 and your portion is $10,000. They might ask something, how would you normally pay for something like this? I know there's probably some people listening to this that have just thrown up in their mouth. I'm sorry if that happened, right? It's really not as big of a deal as you think. And it's not about making it all about the money. It's about getting the patient well. And that isn't really, I say this because some people sit there and they focus on, I'm talking about money. It's not all about the money, folks. Okay. It's about getting the person better. And there's really nothing wrong with telling people how much things cost. Because again, how does this work conventionally? Patient says, well, doctor, how much is all this going to cost? I don't discuss fees. Why don't you see that person over there, Bob? Bob's my treatment coordinator. Bob's going to explain all this to you. So then they get mad at Bob instead of getting mad at you, right? Anyway, something you can try. Start telling patients the fee. You'd be shocked at the change that it can make. So that's point 3. Point 4, and we'll end off with this one. Don't let a patient's insurance coverage or your perceived idea of their financial condition influence your treatment planning. Let me explain what I mean by this. Early in my career, we're talking the 90s. This is the first Clinton administration. So yes, I'm old, I guess you would say. Trying to stay well preserved. I remember meeting with a doctor. I sit down with the doctor and his wife. His wife was the office manager. And so usually I start off innocuously. So tell me what's going on in your office. And she just immediately launches into a tirade. She was pretty pissed at him as to how things were going in the office. Let me tell you what's wrong with the practice. And she just rattles it off, right? He just sat there kind of quiet. And what she brought up is if a patient came in and they had a rip in their jeans and they needed a crown, like this patient needs a crown, clinically presenting needing a crown, the doc wouldn't even recommend a crown. He'd recommend, at the time, this was going way back, some type of multi-pin amalgam restoration. Wouldn't even bring up the crown. Didn't even tell the patient. All right? Now, funnily enough, this was when ripped jeans were in style. This was the Guns N' Roses era, so that was a whole other funny thing. But the point being is, when you look at somebody and you go, oh, they have XYZ insurance, or, they're an Uber driver, or they're this or that, like they don't make a lot of money, and you instantly assume that you shouldn't then recommend the ideal treatment plan to them, you actually not only do a disservice to yourself, you do a disservice to them. We just had a client here this week presenting at one of our seminars who had this story of, had a fella come in who was an Uber driver, and guy came in missing his 4 front teeth, right? And guy wanted a denture. He was going off to get married. And so the doc says, well, I can give you a denture, explain to how a denture work, and goes, I could just replace those teeth and give you some implants. Well, how much would that cost? That was a lot of money. And he explained it probably, get close to as costly as the car you drove in here today. The guy did it. He financed it. Happy as all get out now with, beautiful smile. The point being is you're making a decision based on your idea, your perceived idea of this person, as opposed to just telling somebody what it is they need. And I get asked this too, if you have a new patient come in and they have a lot of treatment that they need. I've seen some doctors that will present it in phases. Well, first I'm going to tell them about the perio they need. Then I'm going to tell them about the restorative treatment they need. And I'll ask, well, why? Well, I don't want them to get blown away all at once. I don't want to, scare them away. Well, what's so scary about the truth? Tell them the truth. Present it in a way that they can, receive the communication, but I wouldn't temper my communication. I would tell them what's really going on. Anyway, I could rattle on about this for hours. We do seminars on this subject. Obviously, we do a lot of sales training for our clients, as well as here at MGE, we train clients in just about anything you could conceive of that has to do with running a practice. But I hope those 4 things help. Just to summarize again, those 4 things. 1, make sure you got enough time. Bring them back for a consultation if you need to. Don't forget that. And if you have time that day, present it. Point 2, make sure they fully understand the treatment. Point 3, doc always discusses the fee. And point 4, don't let other things influence just telling a patient what they need. I hope this helps, guys, and we'll see you guys at the next episode.